Good afternoon and welcome to this month's episode of the Workforce Success Series. I am your host, Kevin Duncombe, and I'm very excited to be here today. This is a topic that I have been looking forward to for quite a while. And by the way, we are recording live from our WESTMARC studios. So if you see some activity behind us, we are preparing for one of our big signature events of the years. But I am very grateful that I have two of my colleagues who have taken time to meet with me today to have this discussion out of their busy schedule, and I will ask them to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Kimberly Jordan, and I'm the Executive Vice President here at WESTMARC.
And I am Luciano Oviedo. I am the ERC WESTMARC Fellow.
And the topic that we are discussing is technology for learning and workforce solutions. Luciano is our Economic Recovery Corps Fellow. We'll get into what that means here in just a little bit, specifically for the West Valley, but I do want to share with you, what does that actually mean? What is the Economic Recovery Corps and why did we go after this? So a short time ago, I did have a conversation with Nicole Manipole of the International Economic Development Council, who is overseeing this program, and I asked her, what are the goals of the ERC Fellowship? Let's listen to what she has to say.
Nicole Manipole. I'm the Senior Program Director for the Economic Recovery Corps program based at the International Economic Development Council, IEDC. The Economic Recovery Corps program is a new multi-year collaborative initiative that was designed to accelerate recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic in distressed communities and regions throughout the U.S., and we're doing that by connecting organizations with the talent and capacity needed to advance new ways of doing economic development that promote economic resilience and transformative change. Over the next 2.5 years, this inaugural cohort of 65 fellows will be embedded with a diverse range of communities and organizations across 42 states and 2 territories to deliver intensive capacity building and technical assistance to advance locally driven projects alongside their host community. The Economic Recovery Corps program was designed to address a lot of the kind of deep-seated and deep-rooted inequities that came to surface during the pandemic. And so with this initiative, we really have 2 major goals. One is, to provide that capacity building technical assistance support to provide immediate relief to the communities that are participating in this inaugural cohort. And then the second piece of this is to really look at how we're training practitioners. How are we developing, this next generation of economic development leaders who are equipped with different types of skills, particularly in collaboration, working across sectors, really building equity and inclusivity into everything that they do, so that, we're looking at economic development from a different lens, one that is, equity-driven and sustainable.
We will hear more from Nicole in just a little bit, but I do want to bring Kimberly and Luciano into the discussion. So Kimberly, we just heard from Nicole what were the goals of the program from IEDC. What was the problem statement for the West Valley that we submitted for their consideration?
So the problem statement that we built the proposal for the ERC Fellowship around really centers on our workforce situation here in the region. So workforce is, not unique, a unique issue to the West Valley, but it looks very different here than it does in other parts of the country. So our unique problem statement is that we are experiencing a hyper growth phase here with business attraction and the companies and industry that is coming into the region, coupled with a very low unemployment rate. So that makes for a very tight labor market. And so that is really at the center of the proposal as our problem statement is, how do we address this unique workforce situation that we're experiencing here in the West Valley?
So I know that this program also builds on the West Valley Pipeline workforce development strategy that we have created to support the West Valley region, the West Valley businesses. Let me take just a moment to share with the audience what we mean by the West Valley Pipeline in case you are unfamiliar. West Valley Pipeline was launched in 2018 as a 5-year strategic plan for workforce development. And the issue that we had at the time, and I say that I came in on the second meeting, I wasn't here for the first meeting, but I came in on the second meeting when we planned this out. The issue that we had at the time is that so many of the West Valley residents were traveling outside of the region for employment because the employment opportunities that they were looking for did not exist in the West Valley in the numbers that they needed to be in order to support the number of residents who were looking for them. So the strategy really addressed two key issues. One was to promote the talent assets that we already have in the West Valley for the purposes of business attraction who can bring in those high quality career opportunities for our residents. And then second, to work with our education institutions, K-12 and post-secondary, to ensure that we have a viable talent pipeline moving forward. So this is a 5-year strategy starting in 2018. If we do the math, 5 years was 2023. So most of last year, I spent a lot of time talking to many constituent groups, focus groups, including mayors, economic development, workforce development, education, and many others to revise the strategy for the next 5-year period. We now call this West Valley Pipeline 2.0. Which builds upon the success that we had in West Valley Pipeline, which just a couple of things, it really emphasizes the business engagement. We absolutely need to hear from our businesses what are their pain points so that we can build solutions to meet their needs. There's also a big emphasis on business engagement with training and education and things like work-based learning, apprenticeship programs, and CTE programs, and so forth. And you can find more about West Valley Pipeline on our website, westmarc.org, or simply call me and I'd be happy to have a further discussion. But I wanted to share that as a grounding for my next question for Kimberly. So Kimberly, you were at the first meeting, so you've been involved from the very beginning. Why was West Valley Pipeline so important for the ERC fellowship proposal?
So by the time we applied for the ERC fellowship, we were already 5 years into the actual implementation of West Valley Pipeline. So throughout the development of that original version of the strategy, we had already developed regional collaboration, partnerships across multiple sectors. So we had a demonstrated product, if you will, of that regional collaboration between government, education, and business, actively working together to implement this workforce development strategy. So it really served as a great anchor, really, to build off of and bring in the ERC fellowship work in parallel to what is already happening in West Valley Pipeline. This just really allows us to kind of take it to another level with our implementation efforts. And I really believe that when the ERC and IEDC were evaluating the proposals that were put forward, that having that track record of that regional collaboration and the momentum already built and that traction really helped to bolster our proposal for the ERC fellowship.
Very good. Luciano, let me ask you, what was it about the West Valley proposal that appealed to you as an ERC fellow candidate?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you kind of consider what KJ described, combined with some activities that I had already been involved with, as background, I'm a technologist at heart and training, working at Intel, and then a startup founder, plus implementing research around the future of learning, the future of work. So as I heard or met with and heard about all the different ways that WESTMARC is looking at growing and developing the community, it was very apparent to me that there was something really interesting going on here in terms of community collaborations. I saw that as very unique. I saw the team itself very unique, very dynamic, very energetic, very receptive to exploring and discovering. And then the problem statement to me was just super compelling around seeing it more as a question. How might we rethink what learning could and should be, as well as what skills look like in this future world given AI? And so kind of given that question, I really saw a huge opportunity to come in and harness kind of both my technology background, my research background, and plus just my overall interest in tackling that type of problem statement as super compelling. And if I'm not mistaken, we are the only out of the matching process. There was 1,500, or the way I like to think about it, it was a national competition for problem statements. There was 500 problem statements proposed, 1,500 problem solvers, and the top 65 were seed funded. And this is the only one out of all those that is primarily focused on AI and technology for learning and workforce development. And so for me, it's a very unique opportunity to really focus in on that, as well as not just think of it as what can we do here locally, but how do we do it in a way that makes it scalable across not just the 64 other communities, but across the country. So to me, that balancing act of the dynamics that were happening here locally with the collaborations, the momentum, the velocity, and already having an existing strategy that this could draft off of, as well as the potential for designing and implementing these in a way that allowed it to scale to these other communities that are also part of the IEDC community as well. That to me was just super compelling.
Excellent. So Luciano, you just mentioned about the competitive nature of the process, both from the candidate perspective and also from the host agency perspective. I wanted to know from Nicole, I'm going to bring her back here in just a moment, what types of projects was IEDC looking for in the proposals that they received from the host agencies? Let's hear what she has to say.
The types of projects we were looking for, especially with this pilot initiative this first time around, number one was that equity was at the heart of it. So, with the Economic Development Administration as our main funder for this program, their key investment criteria right now is around equity and resilience. And so we were looking for communities that had experienced persistent poverty, or host organizations that service those types of communities, places that had not had an easy time accessing federal resources and that have been underinvested in. So that was number one. But we were also looking for organizations and communities that were doing economic development differently, that were thinking about solutions to their economic development challenges in different ways, who maybe had innovated different approaches, collaborative approaches during the pandemic, that were really worth looking at and exploring and potentially amplifying through this program. And finally, we were really looking for hosts and partners who had a level of readiness in leadership that would make, again, a really good cohort, a diverse cohort for this new program that we were launching.
So, Luciano, you mentioned a couple times about the compelling proposal that we put together. I'm biased. I thought we had a very compelling proposal. We worked on it very, very hard to put it together. Obviously, we're not the deciders, right? So we put the proposals together and we submitted, and we hope for the best. We are very happy and very fortunate that we were selected as a host agency, and we are very happy and very fortunate that Luciano was also selected and selected our project. So it was a great confluence of opportunities here. But I wanted to know from Nicole, what was it about our proposal that appealed to the decision to grant us the opportunity to go down this path? Let's listen to what she has to say.
interesting as a project, because it really didn't fit the same criteria that we were seeing kind of over and over again with some of the other host applicants. WESTMARC and its context in Phoenix seemed to have the opposite challenge than many of the communities that we had been assessing, and that there's just this tremendous growth that's happening, and that in fact it's not that there aren't enough jobs and opportunities. There's so many that they're really struggling having the workforce to meet all the demand for these new opportunities. And so that was interesting to us, to have kind of a use case or an example of a context which was experiencing kind of the opposite issue, but at the same time, the idea that they were using AI and looking at AI as a potential solution to some of the workforce development challenges was a very compelling idea for us to explore over 2.5 years, and particularly from that equity standpoint. As a new and emerging, technology and space, ensuring that equity is built in to the ways that it gets deployed, the ways that it gets designed, I think was really critical. So we saw this as a very interesting opportunity to look at, kind of a different type of context with an emergent technology that could really benefit from, intentional equity design.
And I want to thank Nicole Manopel for taking time to share her thoughts with us. And by the way, for all of you out there, if you have any questions as we go through the hour, please drop them in the chat. And if we have time at the end, we'll get to as many as we can. But let's start talking specifics. Kimberly, why was this project so important to the West Valley?
So the West Valley has already been proactively thinking about workforce solutions, as we've already talked about, for many years now. And so, having this project come together with the ERC Fellowship, it really has put the West Valley on the map. I mean, we have been recognized now at a federal level for the work that is happening, and how this ERC Fellowship combined with the momentum of West Valley Pipeline can come together. And so, in my opinion, there are a lot of eyes now, and there's a lot of awareness to what we have going on here in the West Valley. And I'm just extremely proud that all of the collaboration and that regionalism that is alive and well here has been recognized. And, the potential of what this project can do for not just the West Valley, but as Luciano mentioned, how this work will be able to be scaled to become a model and best practices for solutions in other parts of the country. It is huge. So there's been a lot of federal investment, in Arizona, and some of that is landing right here in our backyard in the West Valley. For instance, the investment at the federal level into TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing. That's just an example of the type of industry and opportunities that are coming here to the West Valley. So as we continue to attract more high-tech industry and occupations and opportunities here, it's just that much more important that our talent and our workforce is armed with what they need to be successful, and that we're working with our industry partners to help them solve for some of the workforce challenges. Good problems to have, right? I mean, we have that hyper growth coupled with low unemployment. So how do we best marry up the alignment so that we're making the most of the workforce and the talent that we have, and meeting the needs of the employers that are coming here to the region?
Very good. So my next question is for both of you, either of you. What are some of the intended outcomes of this project?
First, okay. So some of the intended outcomes, again, are really to help identify what is industry. And by the way, when West Valley Pipeline was first put together, we did identify what the target sectors of industry that we're actively, as a region, have agreed we're actively going out to attract and grow here. And so by by identifying that and by beginning to understand, how is industry already leveraging AI and technology to create capacity, to improve innovation, to improve their productivity and just overall success. So understanding how that's happening and how it could happen to just increase their outcomes is one of the intended outcomes of this work. The other intended outcomes include, just again, from the industry and employer perspective, understanding, what are the key skills? What are the key and core skills that are needed to meet their needs as industry partners? But what do our talent and our workforce need to be armed with so that they have what they need to be successful, that they have the skills that are in demand and that are aligned with these emerging opportunities in an increasingly tech focused economy and environment. And so identifying opportunities for people who are already in occupations in these industries to either upskill or reskill so that they're not negatively impacted in any way by technology adoption is a key outcome of the work. And then again, just identifying ways to align education and curriculum development and what is happening on the workforce development spectrum, way back to K-12 even, and how do we align the training and the education and the skill development so that, again, we have that tight alignment in the middle. So.
Luciano, what would you add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was really well said. I kind of want to go back to something KJ mentioned before about eyes on this area. It just so happened I was at a investor huddle meeting, networking and mixer in San Francisco yesterday. And I was talking about what we're doing here in West Valley and WESTMARC, and they knew. They were like, oh yeah, we heard about Phoenix, we heard about TSMC. What's going on there? How are you guys managing skills, talents? And it was all coming to, and I was like, wow, that's really interesting. Anyway, so that's kind of just, it was like, so I imagine that will just become more pervasive. And so that kind of connects back to something you said before about what I call the WESTMARC case study. I think is becoming more and more real. Like what we do here, designing in a way that we can scale and others can learn and kind of adapt it to their particular context, I think is going to be very valuable. And so now back to your question. I mean, I tend to, I think in terms of maybe too much kind of in an engineering centric mindset. So I'm kind of thinking about this whole program in kind of 3 phases. The first phase, discovery. Where are we as, and the unit of analysis can be the organization or the individual, such as industry, as KJ was mentioning, but also the feeders to industry, whether it's higher education, university or community college, or even K or high school, K through 12. And so discovery is around, where are we with harnessing existing technologies and emerging technologies and curriculum. And then the next phase is around where are we going? And then the third phase is how do we get there? And so that's kind of the high level architecture, so to speak, of how I'm at least getting my brain around it. But the direct immediate activities are very specific around engaging with organizations to hit up each of those 3 different stages. So although I painted them as serial, what happens before, it's actually very parallel. So in one organization, doing all 3 simultaneously and introducing pilots that are both emerging tech, new kinds of data, new kinds of processes, and implementing it with their learners to be able to see if we can move the needle in terms of learning performance. So thinking in terms of harnessing AI emerging or AI powered tools to accelerate their learning and skills acquisition. So that's happening now, and it's half research, half implementation. The research is what's the relationship between a person participating in some activity and its impact to their learning performance. And then the solution is, okay, well, here's some tools that either exist or need to be invented in order to achieve some goal. And so that to me is kind of a status of what we're
Okay.
at.
Well, Luciano, I'm going to stay with you. So you kind of gave us the framework. What are you currently working on?
Yes. So I described a little bit about, so there's a couple of, we've kind of divided the different segments. And so one segment is K through 12, another one's higher ed, which could be broken up into community colleges and universities. And then the other segment is industry. And also nonprofits are part of that too. Like, and I would put city organizations, so your economic development and under that as well. But under industry, we have various sectors within that. So manufacturing, healthcare, even startup and innovation as examples, industries. And so we have this view of, as we start to implement, getting a representative sample of each of those. So some initial engagements have been in I'll give you an example of some initial engagements in the K through 12 sector. And so there we are partnering with their teams to both to design and implement tools and curriculum for their incoming freshman class. And so this will enable them to test a few things, because they are also evaluating a new way for how to implement learning curriculum. And so essentially it'll be a set of tools that the educators can use to integrate into the curriculum and in a way measure the learning performance of their students as they're implementing that curriculum. And this is around an area that I call intellectual health. Intellectual health has the typically areas of what's called 21st century skills, has things like collaboration, communication, problem solving, critical reasoning. So we are zooming into very specific ones and giving them what I call AI powered tools to integrate into their curriculum to be able to measure quantitatively the impacts of that activity to their learning. So they'll literally be able to say, oh, this activity was able to improve, let's say, their problem solving or their critical reasoning by X%. And they'll be able to see that and measure it over time. And so looking to implement that over the summer. They also want to scale that off to the fall to their older freshman class. And so ideally, if you could think that, well, what would it look like to have an entire district and all students, 10, 50, 100,000, being able to demonstrate, hey, here is the impact of my experience, my learning, as measured by these kinds of measures. And so that's the vision that we're going after.
Can I just add a little bit to that, just for context? So, you know, Kevin, and what you're doing with implementing West Valley Pipeline and working with employers and employer collaboratives, we hear all the time from every employer about these unicorn skills that are apparently lacking, right? So the critical reasoning and thinking and problem solving and collaborate, all of those things. So those are the skills, again, going back to the alignment that we're hearing from industry that are needed. Education is aware and it's happening, but these tools give a more concrete way to put metrics that are standardized around how do we measure that those things are actually being developed. And what Luciano is referring to with this pilot is a partnership with Agua Fria School District, of which WESTMARC is currently has been identified as a lead collaborator in their work to transition to an academies model. And so this is an example of a pilot with a district that can be scaled, not just within the district, but ideally to other districts here within the West Valley. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I mean, back to the scaling, the deliberate and thoughtful part is how do we design it so it doesn't just scale, let's say, within West Valley, but if you kind of just think of the notion of a district in general, how do these Lego blocks look so that we can take it to any district and be like, hey, here is a way of thinking about not just implementing tools, but also potentially curriculum around AI, which is a whole other kind of beast. Like, how do you, assuming in the future, part of the tool set of an employee is to have these abilities to harness autonomous agents to get work done, then what does that curriculum look like? And and there's both kind of the how to do that, but also how do I understand the trade-offs? And that's open space. When I say trade-offs, it's positives and negatives of that. For example, one critique of some districts has been, well, they're banning AI for usage. Others are embracing it. So you see both. Well, why are the ones banning it? Because they think that they've assumed that it will limit the development of certain skills to students. As on the other hand, you have other districts like, no, we see it as a way to accelerate. And so to me, that's also an interesting way of looking at this. Like, well, both lack evidence. How can we do this in a way that helps build up a body of knowledge to help show, well, hey, here are the trade-offs. And like all trade-offs, there's positives and negatives, more preferred or least preferred.
Mhm.
And how do we do this so that we can build up that body of knowledge to be able to share?
As a workforce development practitioner for many years, I have to say that I'm very excited that this is one of the first projects that's coming off the ground, because Kimberly is absolutely right. That is one of the biggest things that I hear from employers all the time is candidates coming to them not exhibiting the professional skills, the power skills, the 21st century intellectual skills, whatever label we want to put on them. I know that they're being taught, but students and candidates are not exhibiting the skills. And I think one of the things that has been lacking is how do you measure it?
Yep.
And what is improvement? What does improvement look like? So I'm very excited that because we are hearing this from employers, and I think this will be a very well embraced by the community as we get this off the ground.
Kevin, can I just comment one thing about that? And what we're hearing from employers is that it's not just lacking in new grads and people who are just entering into the workforce, like it's across the board in the spectrum of your career, from entry level to seasoned professionals. We're hearing that there's this disconnect between having those skills that the employers are needing and seeking and what is actually being exhibited by the workforce. So we don't want to just knock on the new grads, like it's across the whole so back to your question earlier about what are some of the intended outcomes too. So yes, like developing these skills in a way that's measurable, so that outsiders can't just say, oh yeah, well, we see measured improvement here, but the people who are gaining the skills can really feel like, you know what, I have learned. I can see that I've learned better communication skills throughout this process. But another intended outcome of this work is really increasing digital literacy across the whole spectrum of workforce and industry, really, because again, we're becoming increasingly a tech economy, a tech skills economy. And so there's need, just to increase that digital literacy and those skills across the whole spectrum.
Sure.
Yeah. Let me just want to add, because I think that's really super important. In fact, so although I talked about the case study with high school biography, the real intent is to get to the practitioner, because the early, mid, advanced career professionals are in a really interesting spot right now. Because we're in some respects at this transition period where we have this introduction of these technologies, consumerized generative AI technologies, that makes it super easy, reduces the barrier to entry for a variety of different tasks. And so what does that mean in terms of productivity for existing early, mid, advanced careers professionals? And so I think that's going to be a really interesting question when we get there, because that's going to set the precedent for the recent college grads entering, as well as the pipeline. Is we're going to see this interplay between, oh, how does adoption and learning and iteration occur at the early advanced or early mid advanced professionals versus recent college grads entering workforce versus in the pipeline developing. So for me, it's going to be really interesting to kind of see that interplay.
Well, I think it's the scalability. When we talk about scalability, we're not just talking about, although it does include scaling across the country, but we're also talking even within our region. Kimberly, as you were just sharing, and Luciano, as you just affirmed, it no longer surprises me when I hear businesses talk about people our age who have maybe a little bit of gray in their hair, if they have hair at all, who are not exhibiting those professional skills that they expect or that businesses expect. So I think if we start with this pilot and then be able to scale that, as you're talking about, to the practitioners across the spectrum, that's really what businesses are looking for. And I think that's where we will really have impact. So again, very excited that I don't know if this is the lead project out of the fellowship, but it's one of the lead projects because this is one of the issues that I hear a lot. Let me switch topics here just for a second and talk about businesses and business adoption of technology, business adoption of AI. What are some current examples of that adoption? And I will turn it to you, and then KJ, if you have any other.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Going back to that segmentation of different industries, or kind of how we're looking at different stakeholders and industry being one big bucket, and within their healthcare, manufacturing, et cetera. To me, and I kind of alluded to it, there's a lot of interesting things happening now. It tends to, I tend to look at it in terms of the kind of organization will determine how they're either evaluating or adopting emerging AI or machine intelligence, as I call it. So if the organization is a technology creator, then they are rapidly evaluating and integrating the ability to use AI in some product or service. So I don't know any technology company that is not doing that. Some are what I'll call machine intelligence native. They launched with that in mind. Then you have legacy technology creating companies, usually kind of big or kind of more mature companies that maybe had some platform that they're like, oh, well, now how do we plug this in? Either way, I would wager at least 99% are figuring out how to integrate it into their solution somehow. Sometimes to a fault, like they probably don't even need it, right? But that's a separate question. Now, then you have the technology consumers, which is, hey, I do something else. Like I'm a healthcare organization. How do I apply it? Or before I jump there, in terms of like what is being used by the technology creators, that is really interesting, right? It's essentially a really interesting race between startups and multinationals. Like you have the Amazons, the Googles, the Microsofts, like battling it out for who has the biggest language model, and therefore you should use ours. You have the open source, they're mostly proprietary, and they're battling it out. And therefore, the technology creating companies are mostly not doing that because it's very expensive, takes a lot of resources. So they are adopting whatever these platforms are. And then you have a bunch of startups like Anthropic, who are like doing very interesting niches. And then those are being adopted by these technology creating companies. So I just wanted to kind of give some context of like, that's kind of, it's a huge open horse race, and there is no winner yet. There's no like market leader per se. And it's super rapid, super interesting what's happening. And then plus the layer on of governmental intervention as well, like legislation, privacy is being passed in different states in different ways. The EU is doing its own thing, and then Asia's up. So you got this interplay of like companies like rapidly developing kind of their different versions of generative AI and or other foundational or language models underneath it, battling it out. And then you have the technology creating companies that are not those adopting it them as rapidly as possible, evaluate. So there's a huge, just call it, I don't want to say chaos, but like, how do I evaluate which platform to make a bet on? Because they might be, they might be top today, but they might be behind tomorrow. So it's a really interesting kind of decision making.
It's like the early days of the internet with all the .coms.
Yeah. And then in the help, I mean, so that's technology consumers. Same thing. They're like, okay, who do we make a bet on, right? Because you have the technology creators rolling up some solution. But I think an interesting example is something like in healthcare, or banking, or just really like where data is super sensitive, where you have this intersection of like privacy, security, human, right? Like a patient physician interaction is like, that's very sacred. And so how do you appropriately introduce a technology such as machine intelligence to that? And so to me, that's really interesting dynamic. And you have companies essentially coming in and saying, well, we're going to keep the physician center. We're just going to help them accelerate in terms of productivity. So most of the trends I tend to see now are around productivity improvements, which is a little hard, right? So what is it? Time saved, money saved. And so one health organization I talked to, they are piloting one AI company called Nabla out of France, and they had to really specifically design how the physician interacts with it to keep that patient-physician interaction sacred. So they tried to make it as non-invasive as possible. And then plus you have all the HIPAA constraints. So how do you keep the data? What data do you share, not share? How do you analyze it and then share back? And so I think that's one interesting example of how like they are trying to be sensitive to that relationship, yet have to satisfy all of these, HIPAA and privacy and security happening at once. So that's an example of one different.
So staying with the healthcare example, because healthcare is one of our leading industries here in the West Valley. So I hear more about, some of the technology adoption in healthcare more than other spaces. So, you mentioned productivity, but also patient outcomes is a real, kind of consequence of this tech adoption in a very positive way, right? So for instance, using AI to read radiographs where it can compare hundreds of thousands, I'm just making up these numbers, but thousands and thousands of images, and it can more accurately predict or diagnose and predict issues, right? And so yes, it'll do what it does behind the scenes. It'll read all of, read the radiograph, it compared to all of these other that it has in its banks, and then a human, right, back to the human, keeping it focused on the physician, can kind of verify and then make recommendations based on that. But point being is that it's really assisting with more accurate diagnosis and better patient outcomes, which is fantastic. And just an example of how, using technology not to replace humans, things are going to look different. I mean, let's be honest. There are some things that are going to be automated. There are things that are going to look different, but our purpose isn't to do this work to figure out how to replace humans with technology, which is a real fear that, is out there. So I'm just going to, address the elephant in the room. It's how do we leverage AI and other technologies as tools for humans to be in their toolbox to do things like create better patient outcomes or more productivity or innovation. So, but yeah, those are just some of the examples of how it's being used in a real way today.
Well, let's stay there for just a moment, because that is a question that's coming in. How do we address the challenge or what we hear from constituents that AI or technology is going to replace jobs? How would we answer that?
I mean, I think honestly, to me, so I think honestly, I tend to hear two extremes in my worldview of entrepreneurship and innovation research. One worldview is like the extreme dystopian, like, oh, end of humanity, Matrix, right, or whatever,
Skynet.
Terminator, yeah. And then the other one's the pure, you tell me, oh yes, you know, solve world hunger and cancer and you know. I think it's gonna be a mix in the middle, right? There will be the jobs lost. Because if you think of the productivity, like I'm seeing performance in humans multiply today, right? So a human, they perform at X regardless of whether they're early, mid, advanced career.
Mhm.
They are starting to produce at 3 to 5X. So that means you don't need to hire somebody else, right? They can, and so so if you're a startup, that's brilliant. But if you're an existing organization, it's like, oh well, I can do more with less. And so I think that that's going to be something. But what I don't see is kind of rigor. There's been some studies. So what I'm hearing or what I'm seeing is there's going to be a bunch of jobs created and then a bunch of jobs lost. So I think both are going to happen. I haven't seen enough rigor that shows to what extent either per industry. I've seen some modeling, but I think to me that's how I would answer it as honestly. Yeah, it's going to be, you're going to get both. It's going to depend which industry. It's going to depend what kind of occupation, and that's where the devil, the details comes into play. And at least that's how I think about it.
I mentioned earlier, one of the intended outcomes of this work is to minimize any negative impacts of technology adoption. And I mean, I think that that's at the core of what we're trying to accomplish is identifying opportunities, right? Not challenges per se, but opportunities for humans to upskill, reskill, keep current. That's why the digital literacy and continued skill development, like having that mindset of the lifelong learner, not a new term, but it's having a little bit of a new meaning in today's evolving economy. Like we have to continue to learn all the time and be able to use these tools as tools. Somebody said to me, and I don't remember who it was, but it was pretty recently, about AI and technology, that if you don't use the tool will use you. And that really got my attention. So, you know, I am going to say, like, it's a personal goal of mine to really pay attention to that and keep abreast and learn new things. And how can I leverage some of this technology to increase my own productivity and capacity? And so I think that just continuing to have that focus of, you know, we're looking to identify opportunities to reduce any negative impacts and create better outcomes is just essential. And I think core to what we're trying to accomplish with this work.
Yeah, I just want to quickly just double click on that. Totally agree. And I think that's a unique aspect of this overarching initiative, is that as we're implementing, that is exactly the angle. It is, how do we do it to improve the human condition, accelerate quality of life, and accelerate learning performance. And I think that's also one of the reasons that IADC was particularly interested. Like, how do we do this in a way that comprehends and mitigates negative impacts, learn from it, and be able to share those, so that as other communities start to grapple with the same, they can also do the same.
Well, I'll just add my own perspective to that as a workforce development practitioner. And I know both of you have heard me say this a lot. We have to have an attitude of no one left behind, right? So KJ, you mentioned earlier about the digital literacy, and that's a skill that we need to make sure that we are developing inequitably across the entire spectrum of learning, whether that's our K-12, post-secondary, or adult learners. But also just keeping our eye on the ball. And as we are transforming, and it is inevitable that we will, this train is not going to stop, is to identify and respond as quickly as we can whenever we see issues come up. And so as a workforce development practitioner, that's something that I always have my eye on the ball for that. We are getting a couple questions in chat that I want to make sure that we have some time to address. Thank you for those who are sending the chat questions. This is probably a question for either one of you. KJ, maybe you have a perspective. What industries are more open to integrating technology into their operations, specifically in our West Valley?
So that is part of what Luciano will be discovering during the discovery, but I can say I have a sense of where some of that is happening. So we've already talked about healthcare. We hear a lot from our healthcare partners, how they are utilizing AI and other technologies, across the spectrum, wearable medical devices, data analysis. I gave an example earlier. We've seen more tech adoption in the manufacturing space as, again, manufacturers look to solve some of the workforce challenges that they have, i.e., it's getting more and more difficult to recruit human beings into some of these roles and occupations that exist in manufacturing due to, just perceptions of what it means to be a day in the life of, a manufacturing industry. And so we've seen, I'll give an example of a company that's here in the West Valley. So Iris USA, they are a plastics product manufacturer in the city of Surprise. And had an opportunity to tour them years ago and see their operations. And then Kevin, you were with me, and since you're our president and CEO 2 years ago, time flies. We went out to visit them after they have automated their operations. And so, now you'll see less humans, but more robotics and automation happening within their operations. But I asked while we were there, because it was, again, kind of the elephant in the room question, like, okay, so before you automated, how many people did you employ? I don't remember the number, but I asked, okay, after automation, how many people do you employ? And it was almost exactly the same number of people. And so that was reassuring to me as somebody who has historically been a little, fascinated and simultaneously terrified by, AI and technology. So it was reassuring. Those people have, again, like, they've identified the opportunities to reskill and upskill, and they're, doing different things. So those are just two of our, regional industries that I think we're seeing or hearing about more technology adoption. But, Luciano will be uncovering, who is using it or who's interested but not sure what it could look like, and where are the opportunities to, kind of bring folks along with their technology adoption to improve outcomes overall. And so more to come on, what we're hearing about, but I think it'll be really interesting to see what that does look like in our regional industries.
Yeah, I just want to add one quick, I think that's totally key. I forgot to mention, back to your mitigate negative effects. That is my research background, how to its impacts of emerging tech. And so in every engagement, I'm kind of going through this 360 review, and particularly how to characterize the impact of an emerging technology before it's deployed. So it's the status quo playbook for most every tech company I ever worked with has been, hey, just launch it, see what happens, deal with the consequences later. So it's kind of like so strategy is hey, let somebody we'll deal with it after. And so the idea, and this, in my view, this initiative is to do that analysis before. And so that's turning out to be very beneficial, so that when I come in and we come in, it's there is some notion of, oh yeah, we've thought about this. Here's some analysis and thinking. And that's, I think, going to be a very useful thing to scale as well. Before we adopt something, let's understand the impacts. Before we create something and launch it to some community, let's understand it. So I kind of think that that's also a unique aspect.
So we just have a few minutes left. That's a good segue to my last question. So we've been talking a lot about the project and what Luciano is up to. I will tell you that it's not just Luciano sitting in a room typing on a computer and figuring things out, right? This is a collaborative thing, it's a regional thing. So Luciano, what is your call to action to our region? You have an audience. What are you asking them to do?
Good question. Well, tomorrow we're doing the innovation and entrepreneurial summit. And so I was gonna make the call to action there, but
It's a preview, everyone.
yeah, preview. If you're not there, you should go there. At a high level, it's if you are, I kind of alluded to it, if you're a technology consuming organization, because most of the technology creators are either the big tech or startups. So assuming you're a technology consuming, start to think about what kinds of activities, i.e. pilots, might be interesting to present as a problem statement for problem solvers. So assuming there's a problem solver out there, what would your problem statement look like? And how would you describe it? You know, what is its scope? How would you measure its success if it was solved? You know, so I think that to me would be a interesting analytical exercise, because then it forces one to reflect on the organization, like, huh, where are we? And like what should we be thinking about or doing? And how do I summarize that into a one-pager problem statement? So that to me would be a call to action, to do that activity, even if it's just myself as an individual contributor, or maybe I have a team, I'll do it with a team. What would that look like? And that, I think, is the beginning step for joining us in this journey, because that's something that we can take and also start to connect with other problem statements, which is the direction that we're going. It's kind of creating transparency in these quote problem statements and finding patterns and starting to tackle them.
And using AI to sift through them, probably, right?
Exactly.
Kimberly, do you have anything to add, a call to action?
I think just stay tuned to what's happening in this project, and, you know, start to think of yourself as a potential partner and collaborator, and start to see yourself and how you or your organization may fit into the work as it progresses. So whether you're a company and you want to explore, you know, hey, how could we deploy technologies to improve capacity and productivity at WESTMARC ourselves, you know, as an organization, we are going to go through this process, internally, so that we're walking the walk. I mean, we have, you know, plenty of opportunity to learn and grow and adopt these technologies for our own organization, so we can better serve, you know, the West Valley and everybody else here, and our industry partners and our education partners in the cities. So we're doing it ourselves. So I invite you as, you know, regional partners and collaborators to kind of just think of how you could also fit into this work, because it is going to be a bit of a coalition of the willing, as Kevin likes to say, you know. So we're looking for those opportunities to partner and do pilots that can be scalable and be a part of this larger body of work.
Well, I skipped over several questions. I could continue this conversation for another hour, but for the sake of time, I want to thank Kimberly. I want to thank Luciano for joining me in this hour for this fascinating conversation. There's a lot more to come, everyone, so please stay tuned. I would also like to thank Nicole Monapo for taking some time to meet with us on video and share a lot of her perspectives. We greatly appreciate that. And I want to thank all of you for joining in on this conversation. I know we didn't get to all of the questions in the chat. We will figure out a way that we can address some of these and figure out a way that we can share some of our perspectives with those of you who participated. And if anything comes up in the future, we are at westmarc.org. I think many of you have my contact information. Please feel free to reach out. And if I can't answer it, I'll make sure to send it to the person who's smarter than me who can figure this out. Please join us again on August 21st. Excuse me, I need a cough. Sorry about that. Please join us again on August 21st for our next Workforce Success Series discussion. That one will be on the topic of apprenticeships and all things work-based learning. You can register for that now on our website. But for now, I say thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.